Every great American city leaves its own fingerprint on history. New York gave the world the skyscraper. Detroit gave it the assembly line. Chicago gave it something arguably more universal: lunch, dinner, and dessert. The Windy City has quietly become one of the most consequential food cities in American history, not simply for what it perfected, but for what it actually invented from scratch. Foods you've eaten your entire life, foods sitting in your pantry right now, foods that shaped entire generations of American culture. Nearly all of them trace their DNA straight back to Chicago. Today, we're counting down 9 foods the world owes to this city, and unrolling the real stories behind them: the immigrants who built them out of necessity, the World's Fair that launched half of them into existence, and the arguments that still simmer around a few of them today. Welcome to the Savory Scroll. Let's unroll this one. The year is 1893. Chicago is hosting the World's Columbian Exposition, the most ambitious World's Fair the country had ever attempted. And millions of visitors are pouring into the city, hungry and curious. A German immigrant named Frederick William Ruckheim saw an opportunity in that hunger. He and his brother set up a small stand at the fair, selling a sticky, crunchy combination of peanuts and popcorn coated in molasses, and the crowds responded with genuine enthusiasm. 3 years later, Ruckheim was mass-producing the snack under a name that would eventually become permanently woven into American baseball culture: Cracker Jack. By 1908, it had been written directly into the lyrics of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." By 1912, every box came with a small prize tucked inside. What began as one hungry immigrant's hustle at a Chicago fairground became the official snack of America's national pastime. Still at that same 1893 World's Fair, and this next one genuinely surprises people. Bertha Palmer, a prominent Chicago socialite who chaired the fair's board of lady managers, faced a specific, practical problem. She needed a dessert suitable for the boxed lunches being prepared for thousands of fair attendees, and it had to check 3 boxes at once: portable, indulgent, and reliably delicious. According to the story passed down through the Palmer House Hotel itself, she brought the challenge directly to her hotel's pastry chef, Joseph Sale, and asked him to simply figure it out. What emerged from that kitchen was a dense, fudgy, walnut-topped chocolate square, a dessert with no official name yet, but one that would go on to conquer nearly every bake sale, birthday party, and late-night craving in American history. Food historians note that hard documentation from 1893 itself is thin, and competing origin stories exist elsewhere in the country, but the Palmer House has served its own version of the brownie for well over a century now, using what it maintains is the same original recipe, and the hotel remains one of the most widely cited candidates for where the dessert actually began. Remarkably, the very same fair, the very same year, gave the world something else entirely. 2 Austrian immigrants, Emil Reichel and Sam Ladany, set up a small booth at the 1893 exposition, selling what they billed as Vienna beef hot dogs. The response was strong enough that they opened a permanent storefront the following year, just in time for the hot dog to become something more than a novelty snack. When the Great Depression hit not long after, the Chicago hot dog became a genuine economic lifeline, a cheap, filling meal sold from stands scattered across the entire city. But what actually makes the Chicago dog a document of immigration history, rather than simply a food, is what sits on top of it. Every single topping traces back to a different immigrant community that settled in the city: yellow mustard from German immigrants, onions and tomatoes from Greek immigrants, sweet relish from Eastern European immigrants, and sport peppers from Italian immigrants. One bun, carrying an entire city's immigration history stacked on top of a single sausage. And no, there's no ketchup on a proper Chicago dog. That isn't a matter of local preference. In Chicago, it's treated closer to a law of physics. If there's one food most of the world instinctively associates with Chicago, it's this one, and yet its origin story is genuinely messier than the dish itself. Credit is most commonly given to Ike Sewell and Rick Ricardo, who opened a pizzeria near Chicago's North Side in 1943, a place that would eventually grow into the now famous Pizzeria Uno. Their creation inverted nearly everything people assumed about pizza up to that point: tall, buttery, almost pie crust-style walls of dough, packed with cheese laid directly beneath the sauce, and loaded generously with toppings on top of that. Was it technically still pizza? New Yorkers have spent decades saying no. Chicagoans have spent just as long making it clear they don't particularly care what New Yorkers think. What isn't up for debate is the impact. Deep dish became a genuine cultural identity for the city, the kind of food capable of sparking real arguments on national television, and it once triggered something close to a minor diplomatic incident when a television host memorably dismissed it as tomato soup in a bread bowl. Chicago has neither forgiven nor forgotten that comment. This next one begins with a problem that only a resourceful immigrant community could solve. Italian workers employed at Chicago's stockyards were regularly left with the toughest, least desirable cuts of beef, the pieces nobody else wanted to buy. Rather than let that meat go to waste, workers brought it home, slow-roasted it for hours, sliced it paper-thin, and soaked it in a richly seasoned beef broth, served on crusty Italian rolls capable of soaking up that broth without completely falling apart. It was filling, deeply flavorful, and cost almost nothing to prepare. One widely circulated version of the story credits a street vendor named Anthony Ferrari with realizing that thin-sliced braised beef could stretch much further at large Italian wedding receptions, feeding twice as many guests for half the usual cost. The Italian beef sandwich eventually spread outward from wedding halls to street carts, and finally to the lunch counters that still define Chicago's food identity today. Dipped, wet, or dragged through the garden with hot giardiniera, however you order it, you're eating well over a century of immigrant resourcefulness in a single sandwich. Few American snacks feel more universally familiar than the Twinkie, and few origin stories are quite as gloriously accidental. In 1930, a baker named James Dewar, working for the Continental Baking Company just outside Chicago, was staring at rows of shortcake pans sitting completely idle once strawberry season had ended for the year. He needed a filling that could be produced and sold year-round regardless of season, and he landed on a simple vanilla creme. He needed a name for the finished product, and reportedly found inspiration in a billboard advertisement for twinkle-toe shoes he'd spotted around the city, shortening it into something catchier. By 1980, Twinkies were selling at a rate of roughly 1 billion units per year. When Hostess filed for bankruptcy in 2012 and Twinkies briefly vanished from store shelves nationwide, the public reaction suggested the snack had somehow achieved the cultural status of a genuine utility rather than a mere dessert. It returned to shelves the following year, of course it did, and President Bill Clinton had already included a Twinkie in the 1999 National Millennium Time Capsule, specifically as a symbol of American food culture. Born quietly in the Chicago suburbs, the Twinkie is now simultaneously a museum artifact and an everyday snack. Chicago's food story isn't confined entirely to the 1800s and early 1900s. This next entry happened in 1996, and it's just as remarkable in its own right. Chef Juan Figueroa was flipping through a Puerto Rican newspaper one afternoon when he came across a recipe for a sandwich built around fried green plantains, used in place of bread entirely. He adapted the idea, loading it with thinly sliced steak, melted American cheese, garlic mayo, lettuce, and tomato, and put the finished creation, the Jibarito, on the menu at his restaurant in Chicago's Humboldt Park neighborhood. What followed was pure Chicago. The neighborhood took notice first, then the wider city, and eventually national food media descended on the small restaurant entirely. The Jibarito became something close to a legend, simultaneously a genuine window into Puerto Rican culinary identity and clear proof of Chicago's ongoing role as an incubator for immigrant food innovation. Dozens of restaurants across the country now serve their own version, but the original is still served at Borinquen, exactly where it started. Most entries on this list were born directly out of necessity. This next one was born purely out of showmanship. In 1968, Chris Liakouris, owner of the Parthenon restaurant in Chicago's Greektown neighborhood, was looking for a way to make his fairly ordinary pan-fried cheese dish more memorable to diners. His solution was refreshingly simple. He set it on fire, tableside, directly in front of the customer. The flames shot upward, the crowd shouted "Opa!" in genuine surprise, and a lasting tradition was born on the spot. Flaming Saganaki is, technically speaking, a genuine Chicago invention, since in Greece itself, Saganaki is simply pan-fried cheese, never deliberately set ablaze at the table. The dramatic tableside fire, the theatrical presentation, and the collective shout that follows it are all distinctly Chicago additions, food functioning as pure performance art, and it's been delighting diners in Greektown for well over 50 years running. This final entry sounds like it genuinely shouldn't work on paper. Two flavors that seemingly have no business sharing the same bag. And yet, Garrett popcorn has been made fresh in Chicago since 1949, when the original shop first opened in the Loop. Their now legendary Chicago mix, cheese popcorn and caramel popcorn combined directly in one single bag, defies conventional flavor logic and completely destroys any pretense of portion control. It became so genuinely iconic that lines regularly stretch around entire city blocks outside their shops. Tourists routinely carry oversized tins home like precious cargo, and the mix has reportedly been shipped overseas to military personnel specifically as a taste of home. The Chicago mix works almost as a perfect metaphor for the city itself. Two seemingly incompatible things, thrown together by circumstance and geography, somehow producing something inexplicably, undeniably perfect. Chicago didn't just build itself into one of America's great cities. It fed itself there, one improvised, necessity-driven invention at a time. From the ashes of the Great Fire to the grandeur of the World's Fair, from the stockyards of Little Italy to the Puerto Rican community of Humboldt Park, the food history of this city is really the story of people who arrived with almost nothing and cooked their way directly into it. The next time someone hands you a brownie, cracks open a box of Cracker Jack, or orders a deep dish pizza with the full seriousness the dish demands, remember you're not simply eating food, you're eating Chicago itself. If this changed the way you'll look at your next slice of deep dish or your next Italian beef, let us know in the comments which item on this list surprised you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to the Savory Scroll, because next time, we're unrolling the food history of another American city, hiding its story in plain sight.